My name is Sarah Lang, and I am a young person in long-term recovery. And for me, what that means is I have not had any mind or mood-altering chemicals since March of 2011.
Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you. I know you and the people at YPR have been very busy, just came back from national convention. But let's get things started. Tell me how it was growing up for you.
Growing up for me, well, I grew up in Columbia County, and from a young age, I lived with both of my parents and my older sister. And basically, my parents worked really hard to give me and my sister a lot of opportunities. And for me at the time, I just thought that everybody had those sort of opportunities. And I didn't realize that, you know, my parents worked really hard and that I was really privileged in a lot of ways. You know, I had music lessons. I went to summer camp.
So you played instruments?
Yeah.
What kind of instruments did you play?
I played the piano, I played the clarinet, I played the drums, and I did acting lessons. I was involved in theater. My dad taught me how to play softball. He taught me how to play basketball.
So your dad was around, being a dad.
Yeah.
Both your parents worked.
Yeah, my dad worked and my mom was a homemaker.
Okay.
So she stayed at home.
Full-time job in and of itself.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And when I was young, there was a death in my family, and it changed the family dynamics. So basically, my grandmother passed away, and myself, my mother, and my sister, we all moved away to live with my cousin and take care of her because my grandmother was her guardian at the time. So that kind of split the family for about a year.
And how old were you at that point?
At that time, I think I was about 6 or 7, and I was really too young to understand what was going on and, you know, why my dad had to stay working and living where we lived before, and, you know, why I was living in this new area. And after that, myself, my sister, and both of my parents moved to Chatham, New York, and my cousin went on to live in Florida with her other side of the family. So it was like all these drastic changes were happening, and I didn't really understand them. There wasn't a lot of communication in my family, so we didn't really talk about our feelings. We didn't really talk about, you know, things that go on. It was taught that we keep things private, and kind of how I interpreted that was that I should keep things secretive. And
if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist almost?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Kind of the idea that, like, what happens in our family stays in our family. And so I think I just sort of kept those things hidden, like the feelings that I felt about losing my grandmother and how I felt about, you know, moving from place to place. And I didn't really express myself. I remember when I was very young, I was so shy. Like, I didn't even order food at a restaurant. Like, I would tell my sister what I wanted, so she would talk to the waitress. Like, and I don't know where that came from. I just was, like, really afraid of voicing my opinion, of being heard. And so, like I said, we moved to Chatham, and that was when I was in 2nd grade. So I was about 7 or 8 at the time. And so I went through elementary school, and then in middle school is when they kind of start talking to you about, like, the DARE program and, you know, the idea of drug prevention. At the time was kind of just explaining to kids what alcohol does to you,
Sure.
which drugs are in which categories. I mean, I didn't really learn much from it, but what I did learn was that it looked fun, it looked interesting to me. It was something that was kind of, I'm not going to say bad, but it was labeled as like, you shouldn't do that.
Kind of like taboo.
Yeah.
So how was school up until like the 7th grade? How were your grades? Did you have a lot of friends in school? You said you played the piano. You said you took some acting classes. You played softball with your dad. How was school in elementary school?
School was fun. I liked going to school. I always liked learning, and I liked the social aspect of school. You know, I had a lot of friends. I'm the type of person that can get along with any type of people. You know, I always was
You have to as an addict.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's how I was. I wasn't judgmental of other
Yeah.
people, and I didn't really understand how people could, you know, label someone, stereotype them, and, you know, make judgments on them. So I was kind of the person that didn't really fit in any sort of clique necessarily, and I was friendly with everyone.
Good grades?
Yeah, I had good grades. Mostly A's, I'm going to say A's and B's, but I mean in elementary, grade school, and, you know, middle school, there's not many challenges at that time.
So you get to middle school, 7th grade, they're starting to teach you and you're starting to learn more about drugs through whatever educational program. You said the DARE program that they have.
Yeah.
Tell me about middle school.
Middle
You're still
school.
you're still down in Chatham,
Yeah.
which for people that don't know, it's a smaller community, it's a smaller town.
Yeah. It's a very small school district. It was kind of like you knew everybody that you went to school with, and even in the town itself, it was like you knew where everybody lived, and it's small, yeah. So I think middle school for me was like very awkward time. You know, I think just the idea of adolescence and puberty and trying to figure out your way in the world, and I don't know, I just remember feeling really uncomfortable a lot of the time, like uncomfortable with myself, uncomfortable with my feelings.
Still not communicating within the family, kind of, still the same kind of
Right.
message that's sent. We don't talk about our feelings.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my sister was 2 grades ahead of me in school, and so around that time she went to boarding school.
My sister was 2 grades ahead of me too. We might have just figured out a precursor for addiction.
Yes, that must be it. So she moved out, went to boarding school, and I think I kind of took that personally. I kind of took it like, you know, my older sister has abandoned me. She left me here all alone, you know, just very dramatic. I forgot to mention that I'm very dramatic. I was very dramatic then too.
Well, you took acting classes, you said.
Yeah. So now that also changed the dynamic. You know, now I'm kind of like the only child at home. So I think that made a big difference, especially because, you know, that was a time, like I said, adolescence, it's awkward. It's, you know, I felt like I really needed a positive role model, and, you know, she wasn't there. Which now I understand, you know, she was getting a better education. That makes sense. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. And my mom kept pressuring me to apply to this boarding school. And she would say, you know, it's better education, it'll be good for you, you know, it's a all-girls school. And I just hated the idea. I didn't like the idea of moving again. You know, I didn't want to change. I didn't want to leave my friends. I just fought it. And so that caused a lot of tension, like between me and my mother.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like there's a lot of hostility at home in the way that, you know, teenagers don't really get along with their parents. There's a lot of
There's
arguing.
another precursor.
I mean, I think that's normal for the most
Yeah.
part. Most people have
Not
that
every teenager
experience.
that doesn't get along with their parents becomes a drug addict.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, it was just, you know, a difficult time in life.
Okay. So, at what point were you first introduced to alcohol or drugs? The first time you used, do you remember? How old were you?
I don't really remember specifically. I'm gonna say it probably was drinking alcohol, like sneaking it. But I do remember the first time that I drank alcohol excessively and, you know, was really drunk and like stumbling around, and I remember that.
And how old were you then?
I think I was about 14 at the time.
Okay, so we're talking still a short period of time between like 7th and 8th grade.
Yeah, I was around that time.
Okay.
And I remember, I don't remember specifically the first time I smoked marijuana, but I remember that was around that time too. And
How did you get introduced to alcohol and talking about the first time that you were really intoxicated and drank too much? What were the specifics of that?
the situation
Yeah.
was, it was New Year's Eve, and I was hanging out with a couple of my friends. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 of us, and we were all spending the night at my friend's house. And someone's, you know, older cousin had bought us bottles of liquor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we didn't know, you know, how much you should drink or how much you should buy. So we had like,
You drink a whole bottle of soda, why not, right?
yeah,
And it's New Year's
we
Eve.
had like way too much liquor. Like, you obviously
For
don't.
14-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly. You would think one would be enough, but
Yeah.
we had multiple bottles.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, the thing that I do remember specifically is that I was drinking much faster than everyone else. And I was kind of like, you know, what are you guys waiting for? Like, I thought we're drinking to get drunk, and, you know, why aren't you keeping up with me? And then before I know it, I'm stumbling. I can't even stand up. I can't make it up the stairs. My friend's like, Sarah, you're a mess. Don't let my parents see you, you know. And
Yeah.
I was just thinking, you know, that's how you're supposed to drink.
So was that just New Year's Eve, or did that kind of continue?
That was every time I drank
Okay.
from then on.
From then on, how often do you think that happened?
Well, I think when I got into high school, that was kind of more of the time when it's like, oh, high school parties and, you know, hanging out with the upperclassmen. And I always would be looking for, you know, who's having the party on Friday. So it's kind of like a habit that I formed of drinking every weekend. And if I couldn't, I was very disappointed. I was like let down. You know, that was the thing that I was looking forward to all week long. And as far as like getting high, smoking weed, I wanted to do that every day. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I couldn't see how it was affecting me personally, couldn't see how it was affecting me mentally, or you know, affecting my schoolwork, my friendships, any of that.
And that was a short period of time from that New Year's Eve to the point that you were drinking on the weekends, every weekend,
Yeah.
and then smoking weed all the time.
Yeah. I think it was kind of like, it was almost as if something was like unleashed. Like when I started doing drugs and experimenting, and it was like all of a sudden I realized this is great, you know, this is something I want to do, and I don't understand why people say you shouldn't do this.
Yeah, what was the DARE program talking about? They lied to us.
Yeah, right. Like they were trying to keep a secret.
Yeah,
like,
why do
know.
they always want to keep you from the good stuff?
Right, exactly.
So, how was high school then compared to junior high?
High school was a lot of partying. I mean, I definitely was like labeled a party girl, labeled a stoner, and I just thought these were, you know, cool things. I thought that was a good thing at the time.
How about your interests at that point? We talked earlier about playing the piano, acting class. Obviously, you know, your dad teaching you to play softball. Sounded like you had a pretty good relationship with your parents. Your sister went away to school. How were your relationships affected by your use in high school? And even with friends and your interests?
I think as far as like all the extracurricular things that I was doing, when you get to high school, it's kind of like make it or break it time. And so I remember, you know, if I didn't make the team, I felt like a failure. I felt rejected. And, you know, if I didn't get the part in the play that I wanted, I felt like I'm not good enough and I'll never be good enough. And it really took a toll on my self-esteem, I remember, in high school, because it was like I wanted to be doing these things, but I just kept being told, you know, like, you didn't make the cut. So I was like, now I felt, what am I supposed to do? You know, I can't do the things I want to do. I'm not, you know, good enough to make the team, to get the part. So really I turned to drugs and alcohol. You don't have to be good enough for those things.
It's an equal opportunity employer.
Exactly.
So you go from drinking to smoking weed. Was there anything else? How did your addiction, would you say that you were an addict at what age?
Well, during high school, there was a series of traumatic events in my life. And at that time, I didn't know that's what it was.
So they were a result of your use?
No, it was kind of outside events that had happened.
Okay.
And I didn't know that that's what was happening. You know, I had increased anxiety and panic attacks and, you know, all these kind of like results from serious trauma that had happened in my life, and I just wasn't aware of it. And so by the time I was 17 years old, I was drinking every single day.
You think at that point it was to self-medicate?
Yeah. I think, you know, it started out as being experimental and trying to have fun and kind of just like, oh, this is a phase. And then it went to be like, I really felt like things were out of control. But I think at the time I was too afraid to admit that.
So you think at 17 years old you were an addict?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
And what 17-year-old, I mean, I always say, hey, no kid says when I grow up I want to be an addict.
Yeah.
What 17-year-old says that, thinks that, or wants that, as opposed to, I'm just doing what other 17-year-olds do?
Right.
So how did your addiction progress from alcohol to weed, anything else?
Well, I started doing prescription pills.
How did you get into doing prescription pills? Because I think that's a huge thing with the younger population, especially now. So.
No, I think it definitely is.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely more prevalent now. And I think at the time, I remember, you know, I thought it was innocent, like just pop a few pills.
Just another introduction at a party?
Well, I can't specifically remember when it was, but I remember thinking, you know, this is safe, this is prescribed by a doctor, it's legal.
What could happen?
Yeah, all those sorts of things. And, you know, it's not a big deal if it's not prescribed to me, if it's not medically necessary. I just thought, you know, these make me feel good, so why not take them?
And how old were you when you got into prescription pills?
Probably when I first started using prescription pills, I was 15.
Okay, so that was even earlier than 17.
Yeah.
And how did that progress? Were those the same thing? You talked about drinking on the weekends, wanting to smoke weed all the time. How was that in comparison? How were prescription pills in comparison to your other use? Was that a regular thing? Was that a periodic?
I think just the idea that alcohol and weed are more socially acceptable. So those are the kind of things that I was seeking them out. And when I was doing prescription drugs, it kind of was just like, you know, somebody would say they had some, and then I'd want them, or
Opportunity
somebody would,
knocks.
yeah, somebody would
not seek
offer
it
them
out.
to me. So it wasn't like I wasn't necessarily looking for
Yeah,
them.
right place, right time.
Yeah,
Or
that
wrong
sort of
place,
thing.
wrong time.
Yeah.
So, from prescription drugs, did it stop at prescription drugs?
Well, like I said, when I was 17, I was drinking every day. You know, when I was a senior in high school, I just kind of like took that idea of it's my last year to be a kid, and I really like ran with that idea. So, like I said, I was drinking every day and getting high, doing drugs. And then I thought, that's kind of too obvious. I thought, you know, people are starting to notice that I'm drinking all the time, that I smell like liquor, that I smell like beer.
It's kind of hard to hide the smell of weed.
That's the thing, is like it was getting harder to hide it,
Yeah,
to be honest
the
with
eyes,
you.
the smell,
Yeah.
your breath.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like little red flags were going up where teachers were trying to talk to me about it, or, you know, even guidance counselors or
Sure.
the principal. And so I was kind of like, well, maybe I should change my method.
Switch up.
And that's what I did. I started doing drugs instead. And I was definitely addicted to painkillers.
At what age?
Probably around that same age, 18 years old, around there.
18 years old, addicted to prescription painkillers.
Hmm.
Stops at prescription painkillers.
Well, that's the thing, is like I still didn't want to admit it, you know. If I didn't want to admit I was an alcoholic, I definitely did not want to admit I was a drug addict.
Sure. That's even less
So-
socially acceptable.
Yeah, exactly. So I just kept using pills, painkillers mostly, and I just sort of would, you know, downplay it, like, oh, it's just a bad habit that I have, you know, like it was like smoking cigarettes is a bad habit.
Sure.
You know, all these things that are actual addictions, I just would downplay, like, oh, it's just a habit, you know, I could stop if I want to, or, you know, there'll be a time when I need to stop and I'll be able to. And meanwhile, in the back of my mind, I was starting to question, is that really true? And so after high school, that was the time where it was kind of like social situations changed, and I started hanging out with people who were using more than me, using worse drugs than me, because then by comparison I look good.
Sure. I'm not as bad as she
Yeah,
is.
right, exactly. And by doing that, I really became desensitized to the dangers of, you know, the escalating drug use. And then it was, you know, one day I couldn't get the type of drugs that I wanted, and I knew I could get a different type. So I went out and I got some heroin. Just simple as that.
And how old were you? You're out of school.
I must have been 19 or 20 at the time. It's really hard to remember
Yeah.
time spans.
Oh, I can understand. So 19, 20, can't get prescription drugs, but we can get heroin.
Yeah.
So you try it.
And my mentality at the time is, this is going to save me a lot of money,
Sure.
because prescription drugs are expensive and heroin's more affordable.
Yeah.
And now I can say that's definitely not true, but at the time, it seemed to make a lot of sense to me.
So once you started doing heroin, how long was it before that progressed into the same pattern of use as the alcohol, the weed, the prescription pills?
I'm
How long
gonna
you think
say
you got, how long do you
almost-
think it took to get addicted to heroin?
Well, since I was already addicted to opiates, it was
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I was rationalizing it, thought it was better financial decision to use heroin instead.
Save money.
Yeah. And so I think it just sort of pushed the boundaries of what I was okay with doing, what I thought was acceptable, and as far as behaviors go. You know, I said I was never going to be an IV drug user. So by comparison, those people are worse off.
So did you end up becoming an IV drug user?
Oh yeah.
How long did that take from going from, I'm assuming, powder to IV drug use?
Not very long. Not long at all.
And again, you're the girl that had piano lessons,
Yeah.
grew up in the small town where you knew where everybody lived,
Yep.
was playing softball with your dad,
Yep.
had a great relationship with your sister, now in her early 20s shooting heroin.
Yep.
At what point do you think it became a problem? What stands out as far as we hear people talking about bottoms and like the lows? Is there anything that you can identify as that? Like the turning point where you said, hey, I need help?
I think that when I started using heroin, the progression was a lot faster and the consequences came a lot quicker.
What were
at
some
that
of the
point.
consequences that you're comfortable sharing?
Well, some of the things would, off the top of my head, would be, loss of my family. I started shutting them out more, becoming more isolated. Same thing with my friends. If you didn't like what I was doing, I didn't want to be around you anymore. And those were kind of more emotional consequences that I had because I was pushing people away that I loved and I didn't even realize it, It was like my mindset was changing.
Sure.
Where I thought these people are against me,
How'd you get sober?
How did I get sober? Well, through...
Something happened?
Well, I had some attempts at trying to go to detox. I went to detox multiple times. I tried to go to treatment. I went to...
And you're really young at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, still really young.
Yeah, still. So how did you get sober initially? Because how old were you when you got sober?
I was 22.
It's not really a lot of 22-year-olds that are, we see more and more. We don't hear a lot about it.
Yeah.
So how as a 22-year-old do you get off of heroin and get sober?
With a lot of help. I mean, honestly, it was a hard, long battle. I tried to go to treatment, like I said. I tried detox, tried rehab, inpatient, outpatient, and finally I got into recovery by going through the criminal justice system. And
That'll do it. That'll do it.
yeah, sometimes it doesn't work that
Yeah,
way, but
sometimes we need a little help.
for me, it worked that way.
So you get arrested and the choice, I guess, is presented to you, get straight or go to jail?
Right. Yeah. And I was incarcerated, and I was looking at some pretty serious jail time.
At 22 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the hardest part about getting sober? Or once you got arrested and you were just at that point where you're like, I surrender, was it that easy for you?
No, it wasn't that easy. I really fought it at first. I didn't want to go back to treatment because at that point I felt that it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I thought that I already failed at that attempt, so I was kind of hopeless. I didn't think that I could find recovery, and I didn't think that it was possible for me. I just thought, this is how I'm destined to live.
Yeah. How long have you been sober now?
Now I've been sober for 3.5 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell me about some of the best parts of being sober. I know you're going back to school. I know in a couple minutes we're going to talk about YPR, and you're really active in young people in recovery in that movement. Tell me the great things about being sober.
I think in recovery I really found freedom. And I found personal freedom in that I'm not trapped by my addiction anymore. I'm not, trapped by my emotions anymore. I'm free to express myself. I'm free to...
It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, right. Since that little girl who was always shy and didn't want to talk and was afraid to talk about how she felt, now it's like I can get up and say, here I am, and I'm making moves in my life that were never possible before.
Briefly tell me about YPR and your experience with young people in recovery, because I think that's huge for younger people to be able to say, hey, this is for me, this is possible for me to be, 17, 18, 19, in my 20s and get sober. Tell me briefly about YPR in your experience. I know you just came back from a national conference. How many young people were at that conference, and what was that like?
Well, YPR is Young People in Recovery. It's a national organization. So the work that I do is just in New York. We focus in the Albany area. And the opportunity was presented to me to go to a national leadership conference. And honestly, when that was, when I was invited to go do that, I couldn't believe it. I was like, you want me to go? You're going to send me to Denver, Colorado? And
You're going to pay for my airfare?
Yeah, you're going to pay for me to go here?
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. And when I went there was, I'm going to say, at least 100 people.
Wow, all young people.
All in YPR, and people who are passionate about recovery, who have firsthand experience knowing that it works, that it's possible, and people who are just positive about life. They have helped themselves, and now they want to help other people. And to me, I just think that's so inspiring and
Very
empowering, cool. And we need more services like that.
Yeah. And we're going to give information for YPR. But Sarah, this is your camera over here. In one sentence, if someone's watching or someone knows somebody that's still sick and suffering, could be a younger person, could be an older person, doesn't matter, what advice would you give to that person that's still sick and suffering with the disease of addiction?
I think if I had to give advice, I would say you're not alone and that there's help available. And there's resources out there that are made specifically for you. They're put in place to help you to find recovery. And there's millions of people in America who are in recovery, and we want you to join us.
Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.